I pointed out mold on bread. She yelled at me in a packed store. I felt humiliated. Is this who she has become? Where do I go from here? I feel incredibly anxious about sharing this here. I suppose it's due to the issues I have been avoiding, and I am unsure how to start unpacking my thoughts to process everything. Exhausted seems like an appropriate way to describe my feelings these days. My wife and I have been in a relationship for 10 years and married for 7. Everything was wonderful until the past couple of years. I wish I could identify a specific moment when everything shifted, but there isn't one that I can recall. From the first time I met her, I sensed that she was the one. We were both quite young back then, but I have understood my desires in life for longer than most, and she encompassed everything I had wished for and more. I didn't ask for anything from her. It was sufficient that we loved each other openly and genuinely. It felt as if we could face any challenge together. If someone had told me a few years ago that I would feel this way now, I would have never believed them. Her family has a long-standing history of anger issues. I cannot explain it any other way. There exists a severe pattern of narcissism, greed, addiction, and manipulation. When we first got together, I struggled to comprehend how she managed to be so different from her family. I thought I was experiencing the runs in the family until it meets me phenomenon. However, over the years, cracks began to appear. She became increasingly angry, resentful, and bitter. This anger wasn't directed towards me, but rather stemmed from her overall perspective on life. The change happened quite quickly, without any clear reason to pinpoint its cause. I noticed the shift almost immediately, and with time, I encouraged her to seek therapy. She invited me to join a few of her sessions. It felt more like a recount of her life rather than addressing the issues that needed to be resolved. But I refrained from expressing my thoughts at the time, believing it would take her some time to open up. Her behavior did not improve, it actually worsened over time. The more distressed she became, the harder I tried to rectify the situation. During my own personal challenges, such as dealing with my father's lung cancer and subsequent passing, or my own prolonged illness that led to multiple seizures and numerous hospitalizations, I felt isolated and alone when I needed her the most. Her response was always, "I didn't know how best to help, and you never communicated that you needed me." She is my wife, of course I needed her. I attributed her behavior to depression and a lack of understanding on how to support someone else when she couldn't support herself. I allowed that thought to govern every aspect of my life until recently. When I began to assert myself, the atmosphere would sour rapidly. There has never been any violence or physical abuse beyond her blocking the door to prevent me from leaving when I needed to step away from a tense situation. Yet it feels like every time I express, "You are hurting me," and not making an effort to change your behavior, she invariably turns it back on me or insists that I am being unreasonable. She can fall asleep peacefully at night, while I often wait until she is sound asleep to release my emotions, sob, or at times lie there for hours, completely blank and unsure of how I feel. I feel exhausted every single day. As you read this, I know I may appear foolish. It's probably easy to ask, "Then why don't you leave?" But I do love her, and part of me believes that she loves me too. She just struggles deeply with her mental health and sometimes takes it out on me, which I also acknowledge isn't fair. I often feel as though I am going crazy because everyone else adores her. She is everyone's favorite person. When she enters a room, all eyes are on her. Her laughter is infectious, and her smile brightens anyone's day. Her coworkers have even referred to her as the family dog everyone loves to see, who eagerly greets everyone. Therefore, I constantly feel like the problem. Am I asking for too much? Am I overreacting when she gets angry or yells at me? Have I been inconsiderate of her mental health issues or not mindful enough of her family background? Why am I the only one who sees this side of her? I truly apologize for veering off topic from the original purpose of this post. I assure you, it all ties back to it. It's painful to be addressed like a child in private. It's painful to be with someone you love deeply and no longer recognize. It's painful to request the bare minimum and repeatedly feel disappointed. It's painful to question who is truly in the wrong or whether my staying is doing more harm than good. It's agonizing to envision my life without her, considering she has been all I've known since I was 17. Yet somehow, I manage to cope in private. However, I cannot tolerate being humiliated in public. My social anxiety is so severe that everyday activities like grocery shopping or fueling the car feel intimidating every time I have to do them. She is aware of this. About a month ago, we went grocery shopping at our local store shortly before closing time. At that hour, there are hardly any other customers. While at self-checkout, she asked me to retrieve something she wanted while she continued checking out. I hurried to find the item, but it was out of stock and there was nothing comparable. I quickly returned to let her know, and after having a lovely day out on a date for the first time in months, I was shocked when she snapped at me, saying, "Are you kidding me? Go look again, you must have overlooked it." I felt my face flush, and I noticed no one else had heard her. We were the only patrons at that checkout. I told her I was sure I hadn't overlooked it and was going to wait outside. When she realized she had hurt my feelings, she apologized. I explained how humiliated I felt for being spoken to that way in public. That night, I lay awake, contemplating how we got to the point where she felt comfortable addressing me like that, even with the possibility that someone else might overhear. She assured me it wouldn't happen again, and I was too exhausted to continue the discussion or express my feelings any further, so I let it go. Today, it happened again, and it was worse. It was around 6 p.m., right when the store was filled with people leaving work. The self-checkout lines were long. Our 7-month-old nephew accompanied us that day. She pushed the cart while I handled the stroller. While checking out, I noticed mold forming on the bread she had selected from the deli. I gently pointed it out, suggesting we shouldn't purchase it, and placed it aside to inform someone that it was expired. Then, suddenly, she shouted, "What the hell is your problem?" I was taken aback. Everyone turned to look at us, and I longed to be invisible. I had no idea what I had done to provoke such a reaction. Overwhelmed with humiliation, I grabbed the keys, took the stroller and the baby, and headed to the car. I didn't cry because I didn't want to upset the baby, who was already having a rough day due to teething pain. She got into the car angrily and asked why I was upset and why I had walked out on her. I told her I wasn't interested in arguing and that we could discuss it later. Upon arriving home, she tried to act like everything was normal. After I finally got the baby to nap, I went into the bathroom and completely broke down. I've overlooked so much recently. I have been losing weight due to stress. My hair is falling out and I haven't bothered about my appearance or wardrobe. We have not been intimate. She comes home from work and sits next to our bed, watching television until she decides to sleep. I cook, clean, budget, and manage everything alone. None of my family or friends know what's going on because they all love her so much, and I'm unsure anyone would believe me, especially since she is so cheerful around everyone else. Why is it just me? I feel exhausted, confused, and uncertain about what I truly want from life at this moment. Both leaving and staying feel overwhelming, and I am so drained that I lack the energy to navigate either option. That is why I have remained complacent. I don't even know what the purpose of all this is, other than to finally share it with someone. Perhaps no one will even read this entire post. It seems as if I am disparaging the person I love, but that is not my intention. I've attempted to hold on to every positive aspect of her, but lately, it feels like I'm reaching for straws. I am simply worn out. Should I present her with an ultimatum, stating that I will remain only if she gives therapy and medication a genuine chance and demonstrates an improvement in her behavior and communication? Even though I understand that there are no guarantees she will change, and I cannot foresee the future. Or do I abandon the only life I have known throughout my adulthood thus far, along with the person I believe is my soulmate, no matter how much she has changed? What if happiness awaits on the other side of fear? Yet what if I break my vows and promise to never let her go, ultimately making one of the worst mistakes of my life? I despise being placed in this position, but it feels essential for me to make a decision soon for the sake of my own well-being. Summary: my wife of 7 years is displaying deteriorating behavior, impacting our marriage, and she continuously apologizes without making substantial changes. After briefly trying therapy 4 years ago with no significant improvements, she now seems comfortable publicly humiliating me outside of our home, leading me to contemplate the need for change or departure. I merely needed to express this. Story 2. I am turning 20 later this year, but I am lost in my adulthood due to childhood trauma. I typically do not use Reddit, but I often come across TikToks related to this Reddit page, and I felt compelled to express my feelings. I will be turning 20 later this year, and I feel utterly lost. This is going to be rather lengthy and somewhat disheartening, so I apologize in advance. I just need to share my thoughts. If you prefer not to read this, I completely understand. Throughout my upbringing, I struggled with severe depression, which persists to this day, but now seems more vague or unclear. I have battled this depression since childhood, possibly from ages 4 to 7. I will explain further down. This condition has undoubtedly influenced my childhood in countless ways and is currently adversely affecting my young adulthood, primarily in terms of my memory. I can hardly recall anything from my childhood, remembering mainly negative experiences and only a few positive ones. When I do manage to remember, I often forget the specifics. This hazy memory has made growing up quite challenging, as I feel like I forget around 75% of my experiences, as if they are slipping from one side of my brain to the other and out. This is just one of many factors that have made my life difficult. From what little I can recollect, I began exhibiting signs of distress between the ages of 4 and 7 when I experienced physical abuse at the hands of my grandparents due to my Latino heritage. I lived with them for about a year and a half while my mother pursued her studies and work, during which time my father could only have supervised visits with me due to their divorce. My father often told me that I used to speak Spanish, enjoyed most foods he provided, and was deeply connected to our culture. Even now, he remarks that since moving back in with my mother, I have become quite picky, completely forgotten Spanish, and developed negative feelings toward my culture ideologies that my grandparents ingrained in me. I experienced a sort of whitewashing through physical punishment and abuse. Growing up, I did not comprehend this fully and consistently yearned to see my grandmother. My mother would never allow them to visit and never explained why, leading me to believe that they simply did not want to see us. This created attachment issues and subtle feelings of abandonment within me. Just a few years ago, my mother shared that my grandfather was a predatory individual, and upon learning this, she quickly removed us from that environment and severed ties with them. My mother remarried when I was around 6 years old, taking on a stepfather who assisted in raising me, which I appreciate. However, he unintentionally instilled many detrimental habits in me and never truly understood my struggles. I felt that I could never voice my complaints or discuss my problems because whining is for sisses. Stop crying like a baby and take it like a man. I internalized these statements and kept my issues buried, even when they became severe. This led to feelings of isolation, as I had no one to depend on or confide in. I also began to believe that others were disinterested in my problems simply because I am male. During middle school, my life gradually took a turn for the worse. I made numerous poor decisions involving smoking, drinking, and associating with the wrong crowd. I began to understand the terrible things my grandparents had done to me, and upon learning that these actions were motivated by my race, I felt furious. However, the worst was yet to come. One day, while with a close friend, she introduced me to another girl who was exceedingly tall, around 6 feet 2 inches, and somewhat heavier. I felt intimidated since I was only 4 feet 10 inches at the time, but I initially found her to be a good acquaintance. At a school assembly, she unexpectedly placed my hand on her thigh and smiled. I was taken aback and moved my hand, but she promptly repositioned it. This behavior went on frequently. I moved my hand each time, increasingly forcefully. Eventually, she encouraged me to put my hand under her clothing and perform actions. I refused, as I felt uncomfortable, which frustrated her. A few weeks later, during a lunchtime class project when the teacher left the room, she lunged at me, insisting that we engage in inappropriate actions repeatedly. After I firmly rejected her multiple times, she became agitated and assaulted me. It was a traumatic experience, and she manipulated me into believing it was acceptable because boys enjoy this sort of thing. This incident occurred just before the teacher returned, and I had to pretend that nothing had transpired. Later, I learned from another acquaintance that she had spread rumors claiming I had touched her without consent and that she was frightened of me. I was bewildered, as she had never shown any discomfort around me, and I had no idea why she would feel threatened by my short and slender figure. Consequently, I faced harassment online from several women who labeled me a creep and could do nothing to stop it. I lost one of my closest friends and many others due to these rumors. I never shared this with my parents because I feared being perceived as weak or a sissy. As all these issues accumulated, and I lacked the means to cope or confide in anyone, I grew increasingly suicidal. I attempted to end my life multiple times over several years, with only my fear, and during my last attempt, my now best friend stopping me. I became dependent on alcohol and frequently got drunk at family gatherings, often sneaking away a bottle to consume. The pandemic lockdown only exacerbated my situation. I was isolated from my friends and stuck with a family that either wouldn't listen to my issues or looked down on me for retreating to my room. I finally expressed the desire to seek therapy to my mother, who thankfully agreed to help me find a therapist. Unfortunately, after months of searching, she could not find a single therapist who was not fully booked. Ultimately, she had to resort to a friend of hers who was a therapist, which I believe may be illegal, but I was desperate. Over a few sessions, I disclosed details about the abuse, the assault, and my attempts at self-harm. The therapist suggested a psychiatric hold, but I declined due to concerns about it being recorded, information shared by someone I should not have associated with. I insisted she keep my disclosures from my mother. However, the therapist felt obligated to inform her about my attempts and advised her to watch for any warning signs. I noticed a change in my mother's behavior as she attempted to engage with me more, but it felt forced and disingenuous, so I did not open up. One day, I overheard an argument between my mother and stepfather when I walked in to ask about dinner. Curiously, I hid in my younger brother's closet, which allowed me to hear their conversation through the thin walls. They argued about how my stepfather believed I was isolating myself for attention and that I needed to stop immediately or face consequences. My mother defended me, discussing my attempts, how severely depressed I was, and how they were expected to monitor me. In response, my stepfather dismissed my struggles, stating, "That kid is just doing this for attention and needs to toughen up." As the marriage progressed, my mother gradually gave up on everything due to the mistreatment she faced from my stepfamily, who took advantage of her. She abandoned her responsibilities as a mother and confined herself to her room, refusing to prepare meals, clean, or even answer my questions. My older sister and I took on the responsibilities of cooking, cleaning, and assisting our younger siblings with their schoolwork while managing our studies. For context, this was only feasible because we were in lockdown and attending classes from home. My mother was not available when I needed her support, dismissing me when I tried to express my feelings, saying, "No one cared about how I felt, so why would she care about how you feel?" She directed her anger and frustration toward me, leading to a profound sense of loneliness within my own home. If it weren't for my sister and one of my best friends, I might not be here today. Once the lockdown was lifted, I had a chance to slowly re-enter life with a fresh start, but only a month later, I was compelled to move in with my father after my mother divorced my stepfather, not wanting us to live in poor conditions, which turned out to be a blessing. I was transferred to a new high school, starting fresh without any friends. My depression grew increasingly intense until I met my current friend group and girlfriend, who have contributed significantly to my growth and healing. I find myself in a much happier place now, both physically and mentally, compared to before, yet I feel stuck. I am uncertain about the direction of my life. Having spent so many years dwelling on my struggles and wishing for an end, I never considered my future or what I truly wanted for myself. While I currently hold 2 jobs, neither represents a fulfilling career. I feel as though I am merely existing rather than actively living my life and working toward a goal. My childhood was consumed by sadness and battling depression. Now, as a grown man, I lack the knowledge of how to navigate adulthood and am unsure of the steps I need to take to find success. Thank you for taking the time to read this lengthy message. I just needed to express these feelings, and I hope you have a pleasant day. Story 3. I feel deep jealousy towards my sister's ease in being out, while my own journey was filled with pain and isolation. Why can't I celebrate her? The content warning is included merely due to a very minor detail. I thought it would be prudent to add it for safety's sake. There is no one I care more about than my little sister. I genuinely love her to the moon and back, and I would do anything to ensure her safety and happiness. We have supported each other through some of the most challenging times in each other's lives. However, I have recently observed a pattern in my behavior around her that leaves me feeling profoundly upset. My sister and I both identify as gay. While I am a loser who has never experienced a romantic relationship, my sister has recently started dating a girlfriend. I should feel ecstatic for her. I am truly happy for her. Nevertheless, whenever she mentions her girlfriend, refers to something our parents said regarding the relationship, or simply states, "I am a lesbian," I experience a strange sensation in my stomach. I fall silent. I quickly change the subject. It feels almost involuntary. The more I ponder it, the more I sense that it stems from a place of jealousy. Coming to terms with my sexuality was a struggle for me. When I realized I was gay, I isolated myself before others could reject me. The few friends I had were from my time in the Mormon church, and I instinctively understood that I no longer belonged among them. I suddenly found myself alone. Even after accepting that I was an outcast, I struggled to accept myself for who I truly was. This was a painful journey. The messages I had received and the experiences I went through made me feel like a bad and dangerous person. I hated myself but felt powerless to change, so I succumbed to the belief that I was inferior. I was the last member of my family to attend church regularly. We had all gradually drifted away from it, but I was terrified of my feelings. I would attend church alone, pray, and do everything I could think of, hoping God would notice my pain and help me. Ultimately, nothing changed, and I stopped trying. I convinced myself that no one would genuinely want to be my friend, whether due to my sexuality, appearance, or simply my identity. When I developed feelings for my best and only friend, those beliefs only solidified. I felt utterly alone, and figured this was justifiable. It wasn't until I made a friend online, someone who existed outside my daily life, that I began to accept who I was. She lived on the other side of the country, but her support was invaluable during a very dark chapter in my life. She helped me realize that I didn't need to fear myself. Unfortunately, my parents learned about my communication with a stranger online, which led to complications for me. I eventually came out to them, even though I did not want to. It felt somewhat forced. When I recognized that I could not hide why this person from Michigan was significant in my life, I had to be honest. From the moment I came out, I felt diminished as a person. I perceived myself as less in the eyes of my parents. They have never been outright cruel, but there was an underlying discomfort for some time. Initially, it was, "We wish you weren't gay. We wish with all our hearts that you were not, but it's not our decision." The conversations slowly began to wane. They avoided discussing it for an extended period, and according to my sisters, my parents became uneasy whenever my sexuality came up. I am uncertain when they began to genuinely accept me, but eventually, the awkwardness lessened. That feeling of inadequacy never left me. I still feel it, honestly. I cannot shake the belief that even though they have come to terms with my identity, they do not love me as much as if I were straight. I feel less like their son because of it. This realization feels wrong to express because I know they love me wholeheartedly. I have no valid reason to feel this way, especially towards my mother, who is an incredible person, always making me feel cherished, and I could never thank her enough for that. Perhaps I have convinced myself that I am unworthy of their affection. I'm not aware of the challenges my sister has faced, but I comprehend that, in many ways, her journey has been easier. For one, her exposure to the church was less extensive than mine, preventing it from warping her self-image to the same extent. She has also benefited from a stronger support network. She has had friends in the queer community since middle school, providing her with individuals she could rely on, even when she was uncertain of her identity. Moreover, she had me as her older brother. I always made it a priority to comfort her when needed. I wanted her to know how loved she was and that, regardless of who she became, I would be right beside her, cheering her on. She underwent numerous changes in her self-identity and often turned to me first to discuss her feelings, knowing I would not label her. She was able to come out on her own terms and found the moments to feel comfortable enough to tell our parents about her girlfriend. They accepted her without any tumultuous phase. She described it as a liberating and joyous experience. I truly rejoice that she got to have that. That is why I feel pained that I cannot support her fully when she talks about her girlfriend or her identity. I am meant to be her staunchest ally, the person who cheers her on. Yet, I cannot shake the feeling of jealousy that creeps in every time. I had to tear myself apart repeatedly while she had friends to confide in. My journey with my sexuality disrupted my entire existence. For her, it affirmed and strengthened what she already possessed. When I came out to my parents, I felt shunned and isolated. She felt liberated and cherished. I am genuinely happy that her experience was more positive than mine. I did everything I could to facilitate that for her. Still, I wrestle with jealousy. When I see the brightness in her eyes, I cannot help but reflect on how dull mine remain. However, I'm not upset with her. That is the confusing part. I'm not even sure if I feel robbed or believe I deserve her experience. I'm at a loss for words to describe its shame, internal conflict. I keep returning to that sensation of isolation. I have no understanding of why I feel this way, but it fosters feelings of inadequacy as a brother.